Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Space Station Live. It is Tuesday, May 7th, 2013. This is a live shot inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center. This team has been very busy today working with the Expedition 35 crew on board the International Space Station. Currently on board, Chris Hadfield, Roman Romanenko, and Tom Marshburn are in their final days aboard the orbiting complex. They completed the second of two test-out procedures for the Soyuz that will soon bring them home. This is going to be the Soyuz 33. It's the same vehicle that launched them to the station back in December of 2012. It's going to be bringing them home. You see the current layout of the station there with the Soyuz 33 on the Rassvet module that is pointing down toward Earth. You also see the progress is 50 and 51 back at the back, and the Soyuz 34 up on top of the Poisk module. That is the vehicle that brought up Chris Cassidy, Alexander Mazurkin, and Pavel Vinogradov in March. But everything went according to plan. The crew is also going to be packing up some items today and tomorrow, just getting everything ready for the return home after about 5 months in space. Chris Hadfield also working on an experiment today called NightPod. This is one of the cameras on board that takes pictures of the Earth below, which of course most people have seen. NightPod does pretty much what it sounds like. It helps the crew take photos of nighttime cities and other items down on the planet below. It's a little bit hard to take night pictures on board the International Space Station because of how fast the orbiting complex is traveling. At 17,500 miles an hour, motion blur is a pretty significant issue. So this is basically a high-tech motorized tripod that the crew mounts a camera on, and it takes care of that motion blur and takes fairly crisp pictures of cities and other items down below. So that NightPod has undergone a software update, and Chris Hadfield has been checking it out today. Pavel Vinogradov and Alexander Mazurkin have been busy since yesterday unpacking the Progress 51 vehicle. As we mentioned, it's at the back of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. That is the Zvezda service module. It brought up more than 2 tons of supplies for the crew, so they're going to be busy unpacking that and keeping up with the inventory management system, which is sort of the checklist of items that are coming across the hatchway and where they're stored. Vinogradov also has a physical fitness evaluation later on today on the treadmill. It's back in the Russian segment. They do that from time to time just to monitor the crew's health. He's also going to be collecting some surface samples from some cabling and other elements that are inside the Zarya module, also part of the Russian segment. They swab those surfaces just to make sure that they're staying clean, that there's no bacteria growing up there, and that everything is comfy and ready for the crew to continue living on board the space station. Chris Cassidy has been busy this morning working on Robonaut, getting it set back up for some operational activities that will take place. Here you see footage from earlier today as he and Tom Marshburn back behind him assembled that robot that's on board the station. Typically that robot is controlled by ground commands from here in Houston while the crew monitors it, but there's some activities coming up later on this week for Robonaut. Cassidy also going to be working on the capillary flow experiment today that takes a look at how fluids behave and the capillary flow phenomena up in space, compares it to what people see down on Earth. But the goal is for future human spaceflight for better fluid and fuel systems in spacecraft that will be built in the future, more efficient ways to transfer fuel in those spacecrafts, and also it could have some impacts on water recycling systems like you find on board the International Space Station. That's going to be pretty critical as we look to journeys beyond low Earth orbit, going on to Mars and to asteroids and places such as that. That capillary flow experiment, the principal investigators behind it are Portland State University and Purdue University. Tom Marshburn also, as we talked about, helping out Chris Cassidy today with a variety of activities, including Robonaut, like you just saw. He's also going through some departure preparations. There's quite a lengthy list of items that the crew has to pack up. So he is today, as well as Chris Hadfield and Roman Romanenko. They started their process yesterday. Also, later on in the early morning hours of tomorrow morning, the space station is going to be reboosted. That Progress 51 that we talked about at the back end of the station will fire its thrusters at 1:51 a.m. Central Time. It'll last for 14 minutes and 18 seconds. This is going to set up the station for the upcoming undocking and also the launch of Fyodor Yurchikhin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg. So the space station basically just getting positioned for all these upcoming activities. At the end of that, the station's orbit will be 258.7 by 255.4 statute miles. And finally today, The crew has several different crew Earth observation opportunities for them to take a look down at the planet below to take some photos if they have time. There's some flooding taking place in Saudi Arabia that they're going to be flying over, so they'll try to get pictures of that. There's also an impact crater in Libya that's fairly unusual because it's only about 2 kilometers wide, which sounds fairly wide, but for an impact crater, it's really not all that large. But more importantly than that, it's actually not all that old. So it's about 120 million years old, which is fairly young for an impact crater. In comparison to this, they're going to be flying over another one of these, which is called the West Hawk Impact Crater in Manitoba, Canada. This is just to the north of Lake of the Woods, up there on the border of the U.S. and Canada. This one is 4.5 kilometers wide, so it's quite a significant, more larger size, and it's about 350 million years old. So if you would like to take a look at any of these photos, just log on to eol.jsc.nasa.gov.